Welcome, everyone, to Hello, Ernest at the Kitchen Table, connecting writers and readers. I am Jan Pratt, the author of several children's picture books and also the author of a series of yoga lesson plans for kids.
And I am GaGa Gabardi. I'm a co-author with Judilee Butler. Together, we write the Phoebe Korneal mystery series. Join us for every episode as we connect readers to your next great read.
Welcome, everyone, to Hello, Ernest at the Kitchen Table.
Jan Pratt. Today, Jan is with us. She is a published author of several children's books, and she's moving into, well, I'll let Jan tell you about that. And what I want to do is, first things first, Jan, why don't we take a look at how this all began? Please tell us about what brought you to this kitchen table of writing.
Well, it started probably when I was a kid. I've always been an avid reader as long as I can remember. And somewhere around the time that I started having kids, I thought of all the crazy things that they did. So I saw this little ad in the paper, and it was asking for authors to submit stories for an anthology that was based on the crazy things that kids did. It's called Lessons from Our Children. So I submitted that story, and maybe they were just desperate, but anyway, they agreed to put it in their anthology. And so that was my first published piece. Let's see, probably in about 1990. So a really long time ago. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. Your first piece as a published author is always super exciting. I got my free book in the mail and I read it to all of my kids because it was about my son and my oldest son. And then it just sat on the shelf for a really, really, really long time. In the process, I had several more kids and life got busy and all the different jobs I did. And then during COVID, we were all looking for things to do. So I had some time on my hands and I was doing a lot of hiking, which is my favorite thinking place. And I came up with this character. And that's how my first Amaleigha book was born. It's called Amaleigha and the Big Idea. And it took, I wrote it, I found an illustrator, and then I submitted it to several publishers and had one pick it up. And that's kind of history for that book.
So it sat on the shelf for a number of years. Was there like an aha moment or an experience that caused you to return to the writing 20, 30 years later?
I know that's a long time span, isn't it? But we all get busy. You have to have time to be creative. And I think COVID was the impetus for that. I've always, in that meantime, I worked in public schools. I was a public librarian. I had 4 kids. So I was very much in the kid realm. And so I was always thinking like, oh, that would make a great story. That would make a great story. That would make a great story as these kids do their crazy things. So I think that's was the fuel for the stories. Then the other piece was that I think about that time, we started hearing more about kids that were making an impact in the world. We had people that were fighting for, clean air and they were younger people. And those had an influence too. And I kept thinking, well, how can we empower kids with all the energy and all the creativity that they have to really lean into the fact that they can make a difference too.
Ah, okay, good, good. That certainly helps. Now, so you have several books that you've brought to the table, and I'm curious, do you have a publisher? You said you had one. You use past tense. What's going on with your writing now?
So I had a very idealistic view of what publishing a book would look like.
Ah,
I figured, you submit it, somebody goes, "Yay, I love it," and then they send you a big check, right? And
yeah.
and that's history. That was not the case for me. I think it may still
No.
happen for some people, but in my situation, a publisher picked it up. I actually paid them
Ooh,
to do the editing and to format it and get it in a format that was publishable. And then it kind of just sat there. I actually did two books with with my first publisher out of the UK, and figured out that the process of selling that book was really in my plate. The book went up on their website, it goes out in their marketing information, but past that, not much was going on. So if you were going to distribute that book and get it to a wider audience, it really ended up in
not so
my
much.
in
Ah,
my arena. So I
yeah.
thought, okay, well, I'll try this again. And I came up with my third book idea, and I submitted it to a different publisher. And they were like, yay. And it was pretty much the same scenario. I put out some money to get them to format it and edit it and get it in a publishable format. But I would say the second publisher was probably is still a little bit more proactive in keeping the momentum going, but again, still on my plate for the majority of that. So I do have other plans for books, and in fact, my yoga curriculum series is a self-published piece, and I have another Amaleigha book that will be a self-published piece also. So I'm checking out that arena.
All right. So you're checking out from using publishers and doing your own self publishing.
Correct. That's my
Right.
my next foray into the publishing world.
And that seems to work for you then, I hope.
Well, we'll see, right?
Yeah.
Our
Yeah.
first yoga curriculum is a month old. And I
Okay.
was super excited when I saw on KDP that we had sold 10 copies.
And wow. Okay. That works. That's 10 more than it was a month ago.
Exactly. Exactly.
Exactly. Well, so let's talk about the books you're writing. These are children's books. What do you have as kind of a theme or a motto or something you're trying to get across with the writing?
It goes back to that empowerment of kids, I think. Their crazy ideas and what they can do with them. And I think a lot of kids uh, have great ideas, but they don't know where to go with them. So in the first book, Amaleigha decides she wants to create a park in her community because she loves to be outside. Well, her 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 way to do that is she gets her parents on board and she gets a grandma to help. And so it's the idea that you may not be able to do it by yourself at 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever age, but if you look for support and for that idea, that it could still become a reality.
Okay. And so do you try to um, carry in the story the help from the parents or another meaningful adult or teachers? Is there, some kind of avenue you like to use?
All of those. So in the
All of
first
them.
book, it's parents. In the second book, it's her school librarian and her grandfather. And in the third book, it's her classroom teacher.
Okay, all right, good, good. And so what has the big literary influences for writing children's books? Do you have any particular other writers for children that you rely on or you're trying to use?
Have always loved picture books. Sometimes I think they're more poignant than longer text. You have to say what you've got to say in a really quick amount of time. Um, you know, 15, 20 pages. You've got to make your point. So I love Eric Carle's books, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. I love
Okay.
Shel Silverstein's poems because they're cute and they're funny and they get kids engaged in reading. Um, Mary Pope Osborne, she did the Jack and Annie series, as the kids call it, the Magic Treehouse books. And, they just are creative and get kids not only using their imagination, but learning about historical places. They all travel to some historic event, the Wild West or Egypt or somewhere like that in a magic treehouse that, they go in and come out, go in one place and come out in another. So I love
Mhm.
all of those authors. And, there's many more. As a children's librarian, I had to find a new great author every week to read to kids. So,
Yeah, I think a background of being a librarian is overwhelming. How can you read all of these books? But the important thing is grabbing a few of them, like you've talked about, and then how do you apply it? How can you use it in your storytelling? Not, it's already been told by them. So what's the next step? What will your stories look like? So good. Yeah, thank you for that. Well, what happens? You certainly just don't read children's books, you read other authors. Do you use anything from your other reading that might impact your writing style?
I think to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader because you're always looking at somebody's literary style in a lot of different ways. How did they draw you in? How did they build a good character? Um, how did they develop their plot that keeps you excited, right? I think we've all had that read where you get, 40, 50 pages into the book and you're like, it just didn't
Uh-oh.
resonate for some reason, right? Whether the character wasn't developed correctly or it took too long to get to the action and you think, oh my gosh, I can't go another 150 pages before something happens, right? So as you read those stories and you look at the ones that you put back on the shelf and then you look at the ones that you couldn't put down and you kind of analyze that as you're developing your skill as a writer. Of
Okay.
course, I
All right.
think one other piece that's really important is that you've got to get feedback. You've got to have people that are also looking at your text and going, oh, that's pretty boring. Or, oh, I really love that was a great description that,
Yeah.
put me in that time and place. So you have to get some feedback as you're writing, even though you're using other influences.
Right.
We all think our writing as authors is like the bomb, right?
Wow. Yeah.
You want to
Yeah.
think that you nailed it first time around. But I don't know that that's the case for many of us.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, how do you get that feedback? Where do you go for feedback?
I have a hard time starting with family. I probably go to them last when it's like a more polished version. I like to get a third party that is pretty neutral in that. So I use my editor a lot. Somebody that's going to go through and not only proofread, but look at sequencing, like, does it even make sense? Is it going in the right order? Am I jumping around too much? And then you can kind of tweak that and then get somebody to go back and read for content. But it's gotta make sense and be in a good order first.
Right.
And then you can go, writing a text is multiple editing
Okay.
sequences.
Right.
I don't feel that it starts with just one. You've got to work at it a couple of times.
Okay. All right. And so what happens then when it comes time for revision? Back to your editor for revisions and sequencing, editing
Each time, yep.
every time?
I am not a good editor. I do not pick up on spelling mistakes or punctuation mistakes very well. Because again, I think when I look at it, I know what I've written, and those things get glanced over. So it's got to go back 2 or 3 times to make sure that it's in a. There's nothing worse than reading a text. I get hung up sometimes when I'm reading a book and you come across something that didn't flow just right, a word that maybe is misspelled, or they left out of the or an article of some kind, and all of a sudden you're hung up. You're like, oh, that didn't make sense, and you have to go back. You don't want your reader to have to do that.
Yeah, yeah, you're editing. Yeah, it's too late to
Yeah,
edit once the reader has it in their hands.
exactly.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, good to know. Well, what are your writing habits? I think that for every writer, there's the possibility that you set your alarm clock and you write for 10 minutes, 20, an hour, 10 hour, I don't know. What are you doing? What works for you?
Well, picture books, I think, are very different than longer texts. So for all three of these books, it's like I go for a walk and come up with an idea and then sit down and crank it out, version
Okay.
one. But, we're talking at the most 1,500 words. That's,
Okay.
there's not much.
Right. Okay.
And
All
I
right.
think, once you've cranked that out, for me, then I have to go to my illustrator and say, okay, where would we put pictures in this? And then once we've matched up pictures and text, I can go back and say, oh, well, you know, we need more pictures or we need more text. Maybe this doesn't explain something very well. But that first bit is like a sit and get. I go for a walk, come up with an idea, next day, sit down, crank it out, and then move on from there, which I
It
bet
sounds
many
so
authors
easy.
wish they could do, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sounds very easy. Nothing to it. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
2 hours
Okay.
later, you've got a book.
Well, you're kind of leading us into this conversation about writing is very creative. And then, of course, adding the illustrations to it in the case of children's books, even more creative. But it really takes discipline to make that happen. And how do you blend kind of the two things together?
You probably would say I'm not very disciplined.
Okay. All right. Well, good
A
to
little
admit
bit
it.
more
That's
free
always the first
form,
step.
a little bit more free form in that area. But I do believe it is task oriented. So, it's like sit down, get your first draft, walk away, come back, look at it. Did it make sense? Do all those minor editing details. Did it make sense? Is it in a good order? And then,
Okay.
then the next task for me is to get my illustrator involved. And she's giving me feedback like, you know, I can do a picture for this, but it seems like it'd be better if we did this. And so then it's another revision process. Can we get pictures to match the text?
Okay. But
And then
the
when you
but
have
this
that final bit, of course, then you pull in your editor and you have to keep, going through that part of it.
that part, then yeah, then you're into sequencing and all the other things that editors are so good at. Okay.
And at that
Um,
point, you might need to go back to your illustrator and say, well, we really think, we're going to add another picture, or we're taking this one out. And with picture books, that's an additional cost. Not
right.
only, is it the publishing and the editing, but you've got to work with your illustrator too.
Do you have some kind of a guideline that you use that for a budget for what a book will cost you to develop it all the way through to publishing it? Do you work that way or let it flow?
I let it flow, but from the past experience, I kind of have this ballpark figure. Like, I'd like it not to be more than what the last book
Okay.
cost, right?
All
So,
right. Good.
for me, for a picture book, start to finish with a publisher, I'm looking at probably $4,000 to $5,000
With a publisher.
with a publisher.
So if you piecemeal it as self-published, then you're paying separately for editing, for each round of editing, the review with the illustrator, the cover. Do you think overall it's maybe a more reasonable amount with
I
self-publishing?
I think from what I've seen so far, because I'm pretty new to the self-publishing part, that it is a little bit less costly.
Okay.
Still a chunk of change that's got to come out of your pocket to get it to that place, but maybe a little bit less than working with a publisher.
And when we talk about you've written several books now and you're moving into yoga for children, if I understood that. And are you looking at some kind of support for the storybook that the character development remains the same, or you're growing your character? How do you work with that?
So far, I've written 3 picture books and had short stories in 2 anthologies, and I've used the same character. She's
Okay.
gotten a little bit older in each story.
Oh, okay.
Um, and at this time, I'm looking at a beginning reader collection that would mirror the first 3 books.
Okay. Beginning reader is like kindergarten. When do kids start reading? I don't even know that.
Yeah, kindergarten, first grade are kind
Okay.
of the beginning reader series. So
Okay.
making a simplified version. The first 3 were definitely made to be read to kids. So a higher level of vocabulary.
All right.
So these would be for kids to read.
All right. So learning to read, early
Yes.
readers,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Okay, great. Um, for our listeners who are kind of putting their toe in the water of writing, any advice for those of us?
I would say that stay true to your creativity. I think you have to have a good story first. And I think that comes from within. So while it's great to ask people for advice, if you feel really passionate about your messaging,
Okay,
I would say to honor that.
all right, okay. Respect your own creativity. Yeah, that's a good takeaway. Thank you. What do you think in 5 years? What do you think you'll be doing?
Hopefully, I'll be selling more than 10 copies
10 copies. All
a
right.
month.
Good one. Good one. That
My goal
works.
in 5 years is to get that up there to 20.
Well, that's a reasonable goal. It sounds achievable.
So
All
I'll
right.
keep you posted. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and
Good.
I'll let you know where I am.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll definitely look for that. And actually, when you get ready with your next book, I understand that you're writing another one now. When you want to do a book launch, our podcast is a good platform for that. We'd be more than happy to bring you back and talk about the newest book and launching that with your audience on social media as well. So keep that in mind.
Awesome. Sounds like a great plan.
All right, great. You know, we're kind of getting to the end of our allotted time, but I wondered if you could take a minute or two and share with us, do some reading from one of your books.
Sure. I have a little excerpt. It'll be very short because short stories are short in general. But my newest
Yes.
stories come out, it has come out in an anthology called Brave Kids. And
Okay.
the name of the chapter is Amaleigha Tames a Bully. And so I just wanted to read you this little
Good
snippet about
one.
who the bully is. So Bobby was as loud as a blowhorn, as big as a high school football player, and even used bad words whenever he was far from the teachers listening. When he moved around the classroom, he bumped into desks on purpose just to make things fall on the floor. Take that, you loser, he sneered. And then laughed, Pipsqueaks belong in the back as he shoved his way to the front of the line. So that's a little bit about the bully. The full title of that story is Amaleigha Tames a Bully, Kindness Can Change a Hard Heart. So if you want to find out how she tames Bobby, you can check out Brave Kids.
All right. Very good. Thank you for that. I wondered if you had been in my same classroom with that bully, because it's bringing back memories of when I was in grade school. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I guess they're universal, they're everywhere. Well, thank you,
Exactly.
Jan Pratt, author of children's books. Appreciate talking with you today. Really appreciate sharing all of your experiences. This has been quite the journey. Thank goodness for COVID, I guess, would be one of the takeaways, huh?
Yep, and if people would like to check out my books, they can look me up on my website, which is www.janpratt.com. Also, I the same handle on Instagram and Facebook.
All right. Thank
And
you.
of course, you can find my books on Amazon.
Of course, Amazon's everywhere. Thank you for that. Thanks for joining us today. We certainly appreciate you volunteering to come on in and talk a little bit, giving all of our readers maybe their next best read. Thanks. And goodbye for now.
See y'all later.
Thanks for listening to this informal conversation with today's author.
Join us next time as we connect writers and readers around the kitchen table.